Okay, let me start the session. Actually, the PDPA, Personal Data Protection Act, is related to Thai people. Okay. So that's why, like I mentioned a bit earlier, it's the most comprehensive Thai data privacy law to date to safeguard Thai data owners from illegal collection, use, or sharing their personal information. When we talk about personal data, I will split into two types of data. The first one, personal data. Basically, it's the information that is able to directly or indirectly identify individual, excluding the information of a deceased or the dead person. So we exclude dead person. This kind of personal data, for example, like full name, address, mobile phone, email. So these are personal data. Then we also have another thing called sensitive data, which we will talk a lot in the session because anything that we violate about sensitive data, there will be very serious penalty about sensitive data of data subject and data owner. Can you give me an example? What is sensitive data? Can you type in the chat box and give me example of any sensitive data? Like for the name, right? Myself, Saranya, it's just personal data. Saranya is not sensitive data. It's just personal data to identify myself. What is sensitive data? So sensitive data, for example, about race, religion, political will, belief, sexual orientation, police report, exactly, criminal record, health information, or any genetic biometric data. These are sensitive data. So anything about sensitive data will be elaborated more in section 26 of the law, and we will talk more in detail during the session. When we talk about this act, PDPA, Personal Data Protection Act, right? There are two main characters. The first one, data controller. This person is a person or entity that has the authority to make decisions on the collection, usage, or disclosure of personal data. The second character is data processor. Basically, it's the person or entity perform the operation according to the order or the guideline by data controller. So data controller to make decision, on the collection, usage, and disclosure, and data processor to proceed for that kind of operation. So you will hear a lot of data controller and data processor in this session. And just like, in HR or training team itself, right? We process a lot of personal data of employees. Like for training team, we do the training record of the topic of training, the personal information like employee ID, service year, date of birth, training hours. So we actually collect, use, and disclose this kind of personal data. So we are also data processor. These are like the example. Okay. Then there are also data owner rights. Think about yourself. If you are data owner or data subject, what kind of rights that you think we will have? Because actually PDPA, enforce to protect personal data, right? So what rights that data owner have? We have many rights, right? For example, the right to informed consent, right to withdraw the consent, or right to access to personal data, like our own data. Yes, for CMBR, right to remove or delete the data as well. We also have the right to object and restrict the processing of the data and even edit the data or update the data. So these are our rights as data owner. So data owner and data subject, the same term that we are talking. And for data controller, the person who have the authority or the decision making to process the data. There are also the 6 bases. The first thing and very important thing is to obtain the consent from data owner with clear objective. Also, it has to be, comply with the legal obligation for vital interest, public interest, or legitimate interest. There are many risks of personal data. That's why we have to have the act to prevent the leak of personal data. For example, there might be identity theft, profiling, misuse of the data, and tracking stalking. There might be some case, in the social media or cyber security when there's a hacker or also, the theft in terms of pretend to be yourself and try to ask to transfer the money or do some transaction online. So it can be the identity theft or the misuse of personal data that we have to be aware of. And then this act is not enforced in some cases. Okay, for example, if it's for personal benefit or household activity of such person. Second, it's not enforced in case of the operations of public authorities having the duties to maintain state security. These include financial security, duties with respect to prevention and suppression of money laundering, forensic science, or also cyber security. Third, it's not enforced in the case of the activities for media, fine arts, literature, which also in accordance with professional ethics or for public interest. Also for the House of Representatives, the Senate, Parliament, including the committee appointed by the House of Representatives. Also, for the trial and adjudication of courts and work operation of officer in legal proceedings. Last but not least, it's not enforced in case of the operations of data undertaken by a credit bureau company. So there are also exception in terms of the PDPA in section 4. And as I mentioned that the key word of PDPA is that data collection must be in the consent from data owner, right? But there are some exceptions according to section 24 where it's okay not to get the consent from data owner. So let's see what exception that we have. First, any purpose relating to historical documents, relating to research, statistic, or any public interest, or for preventing or suppressing a danger to a person's life, body, or health, for performance of a contract to which the data subject is a party. Also exception in terms of the law of data controller and the compliance with the law. So these are examples of exception in terms of data collection without consent. And in case that you have to collect the data from other source, like for example, you cannot get the data directly from the data owner but asking for the third party. So there are some exceptional cases. In case data controller has to do that, data controller have to inform data owner within 30 days upon the date of collection. And also, it has to fall within exception to request consent under section 24 and 26. So when we talk about section 24, if you remember the previous slide, it talked about data collection under the consent of data owner. And then we will talk a lot about section 26, talking about sensitive data. There will be like some serious penalty following after the leak or the violation of sensitive data. Then when we collect the sensitive data, right, under section 26, we need a consent unless in the exceptional case that we mentioned earlier. First, if it's to prevent or suppress a damage to life, body, or health of the person, where data subject or data owner is incapable of giving consent. For example, if one person who is the personal data owner in coma, going to the hospital, and then cannot, give any personal information to the hospital staff. But if the spouse or the family member is actually aware of that kind of sensitive health record or the information of the health, the family member or the spouse can also reveal that kind of information for the benefit of life prevention. This kind of situation will be exception. Next, if it complies with the law of appropriate collection safeguard by the foundations, associations, or any other non-profit organization, it can be an exception as well. Then, if the data disclosed to public with consent by data owner, it can also be done. Like for example, in this moment we have a lot of COVID, right? In terms of the COVID-19 situation or the news happening every day. And in Thailand, there's a case where the famous persons review the medical record on the internet showing that he or she has the positive result of COVID-19. So this kind of data disclosed to public is actually happened by data owner itself. Even it's the sensitive data, it can be done. And then if it's for the exercise or defense of legal claim by the compliance or establishment of the law, it can be done as well. I think we have the new joiner. Please help mute the microphone, please. And then we're talking about sensitive data in terms of why we need to collect sensitive data, right? Under section 26. So we collect sensitive data when we would like to have preventive medicine or occupational medicine, or it can be the assessment of working capability of the employee. For example, we as the company or HR person, anytime when we would like to hire a new candidate or employee to our company, we ask the person to have the medical test, right? To make sure that the person has the ability for work at our company. So this kind of sensitive data can be collected because it's under the purpose of, the assessment of working capability. Then also if it's for public interest in public health, such as protecting against cross-border dangerous contagious disease, right? Like for this kind of situation, we have the news every day, like daily report of COVID-19, how many people got infected, etc. So this kind of sensitive data can be disclosed to the public for the interest of the public as well. Then for the employment protection, social security, national health security, or national welfare entitled by law can be collected this kind of sensitive information. Lastly, if it's for scientific, historical, or statistic research purpose, for public interest, it can be collected as well. So when we say it has to be under the consent of data owner, there are some exceptions as well, as I mentioned. In case that there are collection about criminal record, we also have to be sure that this kind of record will be carried out under the control of authorized official authority. Okay, then we are moving to section 28, talking about data transfer cross-border. So it might be related to us because we as CHR, we don't only operate in Thailand as well, but we also operate in overseas properties or in overseas countries. So in terms of transfer personal data to another country, we have some exceptional. Firstly, if it's compliance with the law. Second, the content of data subject has been obtained. If data subject has been informed already about inadequate personal data protection standard of destination country. Like for example, if we have the headquarters in Thailand, right? But overseas property may need more information about that employee because there's job rotation or the people transfer to another property. There will be also personal data transfer between internationally. So we have to be sure that this kind of data already consent by data owner. Then if it's compliance with a contract between data controller and other persons, it can be happen as well. And also for life prevention to prevent or place a danger to life, body, or health of data subject. And for public interest, of course, like we mentioned, a lot already in previous slide. And it's also related in terms of BCR from Binding Corporate Rule Section 29 that any personal data, right, transferred by data controller or data processor in foreign country has to be in the same affiliated business or same group of undertakings. Like in CHR itself, if we transfer employee from Thailand to Sri Lanka or to Maldives, for example, you will need a lot of personal data of that employee to be transferred to your country. So it's also under section 28 and 29 because we are doing this in terms of the same affiliated business, and this will be the exception case that we transfer the personal data. And then we recap a little bit about data owner rights. So the data owner or data subject has the right to request access to personal data and even request for a copy as well. And also has the right to request to transfer personal data. For example, if the person now has the medical treatment in the hospital A, and the person would like to change the hospital to hospital B. So data owner has the right to ask hospital A to transfer the medical record or the certificate to hospital B because it's the right of data owner. Also, data owner has the right to oppose, right? If they're misuse or not comply with the law of personal data, or if the data owner finds out that it's about direct marketing purpose or any statistic or research without consent, they have the right to oppose under the section 32. They also have the right to request to delete the information if it's already too long for the retention period or the data is not updated. So they have the right to do that. Lastly, they also have the right to hold back personal data under section 34. So we are not going to talk through in the detail in every section, right? Because it's very technical term, but we will send you actually the detailed information via PDF file together with this PowerPoint slide so you can share this short session to your employees. And for those people who just joined the session, I would like to emphasize again that PDPA is actually the act applicable to Thai people, both in Thailand and in overseas country. It's the law to protect Thai people. So if in any property that you don't have any Thai people at all, maybe this one is not applicable for you. Maybe what's applicable is GDPR, in the European countries. So we have to see how related that you will also apply or communicate further to your employees. Then we talked already about two main characters of PDPA, right? The first person, data controller. Okay, to recap, data controller is the person or entity has the decision making to collect, use, and disclose personal data. They have so many duties. The first duty that the person of data controller has to do to provide appropriate security measures for preventing the unauthorized or unlawful loss. And also, the measure must be reviewed when it is necessary or when the technology has changed to efficiently maintain appropriate security and safety. Second, data controller has to erase or destruct personal data when the retention period ends, or when the personal data is irrelevant or beyond the purpose necessary to be collected. Another duty is to notify the office of any personal data breach within 72 hours after having become aware of it. Last, the data controller also has the right or the duty to designate a representative who must be in the Kingdom of Thailand and also to be authorized to act on behalf of data controller without any limitation of liability. Okay, so if data controller now is not like in Thailand, in the foreign country, data controller has to assign a representative in a written format, and that representative has to be the person in Thailand. Okay, next, duties of data processor. Okay, of course, duties of data processor will be less than data controller because data processor is the one who operate, collect, use, and disclose according to the order of data controller. So only two duties for data processor. First is to use, collect, or disclose only given by data controller. So just only by order or the guideline by data controller. And to also help provide appropriate security measures to protect, any leak of personal data. It means data controller and data processor are two persons working closely together to make sure that we have provide appropriate security measures. There are also another optional character coming. We call Data Protection Officer, or in short, DPO. When I say optional character, it means no need in every situation. So when we need DPO, right? DPO is actually the person assigned by data controller and data processor in case of three cases. First, if it's a public authority as announced by the committee. Second, if that kind of collection, use, and disclosure happened regularly. Third, if the core activity of data collection is under sensitive data section 26. So these kind of cases is the case when data controller and data processor will assign to have DPO. So to recap in short, in every situation, we will have data controller and data processor, but not in every situation that we will have data protection officer. And what are the duties of DPO? Of course, first, to give advice to data controller and data processor to comply with this act. Second, to investigate the performance of data controller and data processor. Third, to coordinate and cooperate with the office. Last, to keep the confidentiality. It means DPO is assigned to actually investigate and give advice to data controller and data processor. Then let's see the, like in short, we don't have to remember actually the positions of these people, but just to be clear that when we have the act under the law, there will also be the committee of PDPA, right? They include chairperson, vice chairperson, director by position for 5 persons, 9 honorary directors, and the secretary of the committee. These people will be appointed from, skill, experience, and distinguished knowledge. For data owner or data subject, they can always send the complaint to expert committee to investigate the fact and also to make sure that the personal data is comply with the law. In case that the dispute settlement fails, the expert committee or those 10 people that we showed earlier can have the power to order data controller and data processor to rectify their act within specified period. Also, we have competent officer to send a notification letter asking for document or evidence from data controller or data processor and send it to expert committee to investigate the fact, right? In case that data controller and data processor reject to send the document or the evidence, the competent officer can actually ask the court to send a letter so they can actually go to the company or the entity themselves to check for the evidence. Now we are talking about three types of penalty of PDPA before going to the quiz. So there are three types of penalty for Personal Data Protection Act. First, civil liability. When we talk about civil liability, it's about compensation for the damage. And the court can have the power to order the payment for the damage, like actual compensation amount, but not exceeding 2 times. So it can happen that the compensation will be actual amount or 2 times of actual compensation. Second of the penalty, it's penalty of criminal liability. And if you can see from the screen, for criminal liability, the penalty can be both compensation and imprisonment, or either one of them. And the highest amount of the penalty for criminal liability is at 1 million baht or 1 year imprisonment. And if you see from the liability, any violation related to under section 26 about sensitive data will cost the most. So any disclosure without consent, wrong purpose, transfer personal data to foreign country, and if it's sensitive data, there will be the kind of double compensation or penalty happening. And last penalty is administrative liability. If you can notice here, administrative liability is only about compensation, but the compensation amount is higher than what we have in criminal liability. For administrative liability, the compensation can be up to even 5,000 baht, but there's no imprisonment for this cost. Okay, so let's see a little bit about case study why this kind of thing is so important to us that we should be aware of, because sometimes in some case we might be data controller or even data processor. I believe that most of us as a training or HR people, we process a lot of employee personal data, so we need to really be careful. Let me show you the GDPR case study, because PDPA, right? It will be enforced on 27th of May. It's not yet started. So that's why we now don't have the case to show you, but we have GDPR case study from famous company. First, British Airways. It's the airline, right? In 2019, all these three cases happened last year. British Airways fined a record around 183 million pounds after hackers stole customer details. It's the problem of the system security that the hacker can actually store the information, but actually BA also had to be responsible for the fine happen. Second, Facebook, right? Many people now in the world use Facebook, and then they send the personal information for Cambridge Analytica, like for customer analysis information. Also charge around 5 billion USD fine. And last, Google case, right? Google also violate giving information of the people under 18 without the consent from their parents. So it's fine like 1.5% of total revenue of the year. So these are example of the case that happened for GDPR. So now it's the time that we start communicate about PDPA to our employees, and this PDPA short session happen in every organization, in every industry. And also we will see later on if in the future we have this kind of PDPA fine case, but we try to minimize the violation, the leak of personal data as much as we can. Then before we separate and share back to you about the detail of the law and the act, let's have some quiz to make sure the understanding that we have. So you can actually type the answer in the chat box. Okay, question number 1. What is personal data? A, B, C, or D? Can you help type the answer on the chat box, please? Okay, we have some guess already. Yes, all of the above. Personal data, here you can see their name, age, religion, date of birth, telephone number, work experience, all personal data. But there might be a little bit of differentiation, like for example, religion, medical history will be categorized in sensitive data, right? But all of them are personal data. Second, what is the main purpose of PDPA? Okay, waiting for a few more answers. Right, correct. The main purpose is to prevent personal data to be collected, used, or disclosed in wrong purpose. Question, who must comply with PDPA? Very good. Both a person and juristic person. Okay, juristic person can be entity, company, right? 5. What is the risk when personal data is leaked? Okay, actually it's all of the above. Like when we mentioned in the early slide that there are several risks of personal data. It can be by identity theft, right? Pretend to be yourself, online or cybersecurity. It can be misuse of information. It can be tracking and stalking as well, right? If it's leaked. 6. If you would like to use personal data, what do you have to do? If you need to use personal data, you just have to inform the purpose and ask for the consent of data owner, right? Like we are HR, we have to hire one candidate and we have to inform the purpose why you have to do the medical assessment before we hire you, because we have to assess your working capability. So first step, we inform the candidate about the purpose of medical assessment and then ask for the consent as well. Okay, we don't have to find any weakness. 7. What is not an exception for personal data collection without consent? Most of the time, we need to collect personal data with consent, but there are some exceptions, which is not an exception. Yeah, for own interest, no. But we can do it for public interest, for life prevention, compliance with the law. Number 8, what is the violation of PDPA? Great. Hospital staff shares famous actors' medical report on the internet. This is very clear. We cannot do that, right? Because actually this will result in very serious penalty, as the medical report is included in sensitive data as well. Number 9, what is civil liability of PDPA violation? We talked earlier that there are 3 types of liability: civil liability, criminal liability, and administrative liability. So what is the penalty of civil liability? Great, compensation. And can you remember how much for the compensation? We can actually have the actual amount of compensation, or how many times of actual compensation that we can charge. 2 times, 3 times, 4 times. Like if there's a violation, right, of PDPA and there's a civil liability, actual amount of the compensation, let's say 10,000. But the court can also charge more than 10,000, right? How many times that the court can charge? We can actually charge 2 times more from actual compensation for civil liability. So the court can order to charge 10,000 as actual compensation, or can order to charge 20,000 as 2 times civil liability compensation as well. Last question. What is the highest liability of PDPA violation? This one including 3 types of liability. So what will be the answer? So the highest liability of PDPA violation, 1 year imprisonment for criminal liability, right? 5,000, no, 5 million baht compensation for administrative liability and 2 times of actual compensation amount for civil liability. So remember, there are 3 types of liability. For civil liability, it's only about compensation and it can be charged not exceeding 2 times of actual compensation. The second type of penalty is criminal liability. It can be both compensation or imprisonment, but no more than 1 million baht or 1 year imprisonment. Last, for administrative liability, it's only about compensation, but the amount will be higher than criminal liability, and the highest is at 5 million baht for compensation. So these are actually the overall concept of PDPA, okay? So before we end the session, I would like to make sure that you understand what is it about PDPA. It's applicable for Thai people working inside Thailand and outside Thailand. There are 2 main characters called data controller and data processor. And in some situation, there might be the person called data protection officer or DPO, assigned and appointed by data controller, data processor. And we talk about the section of the law, right? Like for example, section 24 about giving personal data with consent. There are some exceptions that we can actually revise later on. And we talk about sensitive data, section 26, which anything that related to sensitive data, there will be highest penalty for that. And we also talk about transferring data to international country, other foreign country, under section 28 and 29, right? So these are the key sections of the law of PDPA that we have to be aware of.